Imagine this. You're sitting in your living room, maybe scrolling through your phone or sipping coffee, thinking your day is just another ordinary one. Now, picture being a detective on a night shift, called out to a crime scene that's so horrifying, even the most seasoned officers can't stomach it. The kind of scene that turns your blood cold, stays burned into your mind for life, and follows you home, showing up in your nightmares. Tonight, you're not just a viewer. You're stepping into the shoes of the investigators who faced horrors that changed them forever. Welcome to Detectives Reveal the Most Gruesome Cases of Their Careers. This isn't just another crime story. This is a collection of raw, true, and terrifying experiences shared by those who lived through them. And by the end of this video, you're going to get the answer to the question that pulled you here. What happens when even the police are shaken to their core? Before we dive in, I want to speak to you directly because this story isn't just about the crimes. It's about human psychology, the darkness we don't want to believe exists, and what happens when the people we count on to hold it all together come face to face with the unthinkable. This isn't fiction. These are real cases, with real victims and real consequences. And once you see what these detectives saw, you'll understand why some cases never leave their minds. This video isn't meant to shock you for the sake of it. It's meant to show you the truth behind the headlines. You're going to hear from detectives themselves, their voices, their thoughts, their breaking points. So if you're ready to go behind the badge and witness what most people will never know about the darkest corners of society, stay with me.
Don't skip.
Don't click away, because you'll miss the very moments that bring this all together. Let me tell you what makes these cases different from the hundreds detectives work every year. These are the ones that haunt. The ones that cracked hardened professionals. The ones that made them question everything about humanity, about justice, and sometimes about themselves. From basements that reveal hidden dungeons, to family homes that become crime scenes so brutal they look like horror movie sets, each story you're about to hear is worse than the last. We're talking about real-life nightmares that start with a 911 call and end in crime scenes that forensic teams can't forget. And here's the kicker. These aren't the cases you've seen in documentaries. These are the stories most departments keep buried because they're just too disturbing to share publicly.
Until now.
You see, these detectives didn't set out to scare anyone. But the more time they spent investigating crimes, the more they realized that some evil goes far beyond what anyone's prepared for. What we're about to walk through isn't your average crime story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. These cases twist, turn, and sometimes leave more questions than answers. And yet, every single one changed the detective involved in ways they never saw coming. Some quit.
Some needed therapy.
Some are still haunted by voices and visions from the past. It's easy to forget that police officers are people until you see what they see. Until you hear how they fought to keep their emotions in check while holding back tears. And when they say, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen," you believe them. Because their voice shakes, their eyes drop, and their breathing changes. This video is going to take you inside crime scenes so brutal, so psychologically disturbing, they redefined what these detectives thought was even possible. One officer described a house that looked completely normal on the outside, freshly painted, well-kept lawn, holiday decorations. But what they found inside made seasoned forensic techs gag. Another recalled a mother who greeted them at the door smiling, only for them to discover what she'd done to her own children just moments before their arrival. We'll cover cases involving dismemberment, secret torture chambers, and even twisted motives rooted in jealousy, cult beliefs, and mental illness. But more than that, we'll hear how the detectives unraveled the truth, even when every clue seemed designed to mislead them. I want you to think about how your body reacts when you're terrified. Your stomach clenches, your skin gets cold, your heartbeat speeds up. Now imagine trying to stay calm, think clearly, and gather evidence while feeling that way. That's what these detectives had to do. In some cases, they were lied to by people who smiled through their deception. In others, they had to dig through mountains of gruesome photographs and evidence, knowing that somewhere in the chaos was a clue that could solve it all. And yes, there are moments where they broke down because when you see what they've seen, holding it all in just isn't an option. This video doesn't hold back. And as uncomfortable as it might get, I promise you, It's worth it. Because the deeper we go, the more we uncover about human nature, resilience, and the razor-thin line between justice and tragedy. There's one case in particular that we'll get to later in the video that left an entire department shaken. It started with what looked like a simple welfare check. A neighbor called in because the house had been strangely quiet, mail piling up, lights off for days. When officers arrived, they expected maybe a medical emergency or someone who'd gone out of town. But what they found inside the house was something no one could have imagined. Blood was everywhere, but not just spilled, it was used. Used to write, to paint, to mark something ritualistic. One detective dropped his flashlight. Another couldn't walk further in without help. It was that bad. And the worst part? The killer wasn't gone. He was still inside, watching. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there, trust me. That story alone is one of the most terrifying accounts ever recorded in a police report, and we're going to break it down moment by moment. The sights, the smells, the eerie silence before the chaos. I'm going to walk you through it all. But to understand why that case hits so hard, you need to know what led up to it. And that's why, in this video, we're going deep. We'll hear about the most extreme cases from detectives who agreed to speak candidly, some for the first time. They'll take you inside their minds and memories, showing you exactly what they experienced. You'll feel their shock, their horror, and their drive to bring justice, even when the odds were stacked against them. So, stay right here with me. Don't pause, don't back out. I know it's a lot to take in, but if you've made it this far, you're already one of the few willing to face the truth. We're not even halfway into what these detectives endured. In fact, the story is just beginning. The crimes you're about to hear next, they'll make you question what people are truly capable of. And just when you think you've heard the worst of it, the case that ends this video will flip everything upside down. A case so twisted, so sickening, that even the lead detective, after 30 years on the force, said he had to step away from the job for good. So buckle up. What comes next will take you deeper into darkness than most true crime stories ever go. You'll see how investigators connected clues from shredded journals, chilling voice recordings, and even artwork left by killers themselves. You'll hear about families destroyed, innocence lost, and evil that wore the face of normality. And when we finally reach the final case, the one that pushed every boundary, you'll understand why this video had to be made. Because there are some stories that demand to be told, no matter how disturbing they are. And in the next moment, we enter the scene that started it all, the call that changed everything. When the officer walked through that front door, he had no idea what horror was waiting just beyond the hallway. He stepped inside, gun holstered but ready, flashlight cutting through the still air, dust hanging like a veil in the beam. The living room looked untouched, almost staged, magazines fanned neatly on the coffee table, a muted television frozen on a static-filled screen. But the smell hit first. Not just the kind of odor you expect in abandoned homes or forgotten spaces, but something foul and organic. Something final. He paused, listening. The silence pressed in on him, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels crowded, like someone else is holding their breath nearby. As the officer moved forward, calling out once, then again, he reached the hallway, where the faint trail of something dark and dried marked the edge of a rug. That's when it all began to unravel. The house belonged to a man named Curtis Ellman, 43, a local high school art teacher with a gentle smile and the kind of reputation that made neighbors wave before he even raised a hand. He'd lived alone since his divorce 3 years prior, a separation that most in the community assumed was peaceful, maybe even overdue. People described him as quiet, thoughtful, the kind who lent tools and remembered birthdays. But in the weeks leading up to that welfare check, things had shifted. His front lights, usually glowing like clockwork, had stayed dark. His car hadn't moved. Friends and coworkers mentioned that Curtis had taken an unexpected leave from the school, citing personal reasons. No one questioned it. Teachers need breaks too. But what no one saw coming was how far Curtis had spiraled after his last day on campus. Or the chilling artwork he'd been hiding in the studio behind his home, where canvases told a story no one wanted to read. The deeper detectives dug into Curtis's recent life, the more contradictions surfaced. His ex-wife, Melissa, told police that Curtis had grown increasingly paranoid in recent months, often rambling about hidden messages and dark visions. At first, she thought it was stress. Then she found journals stuffed in their shared storage unit, pages inked with drawings of human eyes, strange symbols, and cryptic messages about being watched. She brushed it off until the phone calls started. Late-night voicemails from Curtis, barely audible, saying things like, "They're in the house," and "I know what happened to her." But who she was, Melissa had no idea. She hadn't spoken to Curtis in months before those messages began. Investigators began combing through Curtis's digital life. His search history was a bizarre mix: art tutorials, true crime podcasts, missing persons reports from states far outside their jurisdiction. One name came up repeatedly: Lacey Monroe, a 17-year-old girl who vanished 2 years ago after attending a house party just a few towns over. Her body was never found. Her case, though cold, had sparked viral attention thanks to TikTok sleuths and YouTube creators who turned her disappearance into a trending true crime series. Curtis had bookmarked every video, watched each one multiple times, and even commented under several accounts. Some comments were sympathetic, others were unsettling. "She's not missing," one read. "She's waiting." Another simply said, "I've seen her." The discovery raised immediate red flags. Curtis had never been connected to Lacey, at least not officially. But when detectives pulled school records and faculty logs, they found a shocking overlap. Lacey's older sister, Cara Monroe, had been in Curtis's art class 5 years ago, and her name showed up in one of the journals, circled in red ink. Now the question wasn't just what happened inside Curtis's home, but whether this mild-mannered teacher had been hiding a history far darker than anyone could have guessed. Or was something else at play entirely? Was he obsessed with the case? Mentally unraveling? Or worse, had someone planted this evidence to frame him? Neighbors, when interviewed, began remembering strange details. One said Curtis had been fixing his backyard shed late at night for weeks before he vanished. Another swore they saw a young woman leaving his house one evening, maybe early 20s, wearing a hood. But no one ever got a name or a clear look. And yet, when officers checked his shed, they found it padlocked from the outside, reinforced with extra bolts. Inside, a sickening scene waited: rusted tools, ropes, a mattress stained in ways that needed no explanation, and more of Curtis's artwork, portraits that looked eerily like Lacey, eyes scratched out violently. But nothing was simple. Forensics revealed no DNA match to Lacey. No fingerprints. No blood confirmed to be hers. The shed, disturbing as it was, offered no concrete link, just implications. That's when police received an anonymous tip, a distorted voice message left on the department's public tip line. The caller claimed Curtis wasn't the killer, that the real killer was close, watching the investigation unfold. And more chilling still, they hinted that Curtis had been trying to protect someone.
He found out, the voice said.
He couldn't live with it, but he didn't do it. Suddenly, the list of potential suspects widened. Could it be a former student with a vendetta? An online follower obsessed with Curtis's art and spiraling mental health? Or someone from Lacey's world, desperate to bury the truth once and for all? Red herrings began stacking up. Curtis's coworker, Mr. Benford, who often argued with him behind closed doors, had a sealed criminal record and refused to talk without legal counsel. A local contractor who did weekend renovations for Curtis had recently gone off the grid. And Melissa, his ex-wife, seemed unusually informed about details police hadn't released. Tension within the department grew as detectives clashed over the evidence. Some believed Curtis was the mastermind behind a crime darker than anyone had imagined. Others were convinced he was a scapegoat, caught in a game of manipulation and deceit. One rookie detective, Rachel Hayes, started going through the case logs on her own time, convinced that something wasn't right. Her theory? That someone had been watching Curtis long before the first red flag was ever raised, and that maybe, just maybe, this person had been pulling strings in ways the entire department missed. Each new layer made the case harder to solve. And as the team prepared to release a public statement, another anonymous package arrived at the precinct. Inside, a flash drive. No return address. No fingerprints. Just one file titled Truth, MOV. When played, the footage showed Curtis, gaunt and disheveled, sitting in front of a camera in his studio. He stares into the lens for 30 seconds without saying a word. Then, in a trembling voice, he says just 2 sentences. They made me watch. And now, I see everything. And what came after that, what the detectives found when they froze the frame and enhanced the background, is something you won't believe. But before we reveal it, you need to understand who else might have been watching Curtis all along. Because the real predator? They weren't just hiding in the shadows, they were standing in plain sight. You said. Detective Rachel Hayes had never believed in coincidences. Not after everything she'd seen in the force. Not after watching too many cases fall apart because someone decided a missing file or a corrupted video was just bad luck. So when the flash drive containing Curtis's final message disappeared from the department's evidence locker less than 24 hours after it was logged, she knew something, or someone, was working against them. The chain of custody was clear. The footage had been uploaded, encrypted, and backed up. But when she returned to cross-reference timestamps, the file was gone. No error messages, no data corruption, no sign of forced entry.
Just gone.
The only people with access were her team, the evidence tech, and Captain Landon, who'd been oddly dismissive of the footage from the beginning, brushing it off as a man unraveling into madness. But Rachel knew better. She'd watched that video a dozen times. It wasn't the rambling of someone unhinged, it was a warning. The next day, an envelope showed up at Rachel's apartment. No name, just a Polaroid photo inside, an old picture from nearly 2 decades ago. A group of teenagers at what looked like a summer camp, faces lit by the glow of a campfire. In the center, unmistakably young, was Curtis. And next to him was someone Rachel recognized immediately, Captain Landon. The back of the photo had one sentence written in shaky ink. This is where it started. Rachel had no idea what the message meant, but she couldn't ignore the chill that crept into her spine. What connection did Landon have to Curtis that he never mentioned? And why had he taken personal control of the case file the moment that flash drive came in? Trying not to raise suspicion, Rachel dug into old employment records and public archives, trying to trace the location from the photo. It took her 3 sleepless nights, but she finally matched the image to a defunct wilderness camp outside Boise, Idaho, Camp Wren Hollow. It shut down years ago, but its name came up in connection with a child neglect scandal in the early 2000s. Allegations had surfaced about staff mistreatment, disappearances swept under the rug, but no charges were ever filed. The camp's entire history had been buried until now. Rachel realized with growing dread that Curtis and Landon weren't just connected by chance. They shared something much deeper. A past event so damaging, someone was willing to destroy evidence to keep it quiet. At the same time, a new player entered the story. A woman named Adriana Vega, a private investigator claiming to have been hired by Lacey Monroe's family, reached out to Rachel through a burner email. She said she had information that could expose everything. The truth about Lacey's final days, Curtis's real motives, and the people orchestrating the cover-up. But there was a catch. Adriana didn't trust law enforcement. She insisted on meeting in person, alone, in a public location. Rachel agreed, desperate for answers. They met in a crowded diner just outside the city limits. Adriana was sharp, guarded, and clearly on edge. She slid a manila folder across the table and told Rachel not to open it until she was safely back at the precinct. But before Rachel could ask her anything more, Adriana stood up, whispering only one sentence before walking out the door. "Don't trust anyone in your department, not even the ones who seem clean." That folder changed everything. Inside were surveillance photos of Curtis, yes, but also of Rachel. Shots of her outside her apartment, in her car, even in the precinct parking lot. Someone had been watching her too. And the photos weren't recent. They dated back months. Long before Curtis became a suspect. Someone had anticipated her involvement, which meant the game wasn't just about hiding a crime, it was about controlling the investigation from the start. Rachel's world was closing in. Her phone calls began to glitch. Her emails stopped syncing. And then came the voice message, distorted, almost mechanical, saying, "You're getting too close. Walk away, or you won't walk away at all." She tried tracing it, but the signal was rerouted through layers of spoof locations. The only clear clue was a timestamp from a cell tower near Camp Wren Hollow. Back at the precinct, Rachel confronted Captain Landon. She expected denial, anger, maybe even a flat-out lie. What she didn't expect was a smile. A slow, knowing smile that told her he had nothing to fear, and that she was already in too deep. Landon didn't say much. Just one sentence that echoed in her mind long after she left his office. "Some truths don't set you free, they bury you." But Rachel wasn't done. She called Adriana the next day, only to get a disconnected number. When she tried her backup line, it rang once, then went silent. Hours later, news broke that a woman was found dead in a car crash just outside the city. Unidentified at first. But Rachel didn't need confirmation. She already knew. The game had turned deadly. What Rachel didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that a new piece of evidence was about to surface. Something buried for over 20 years, sealed in a time capsule meant to commemorate Camp Wren Hollow's final year. The capsule had just been unearthed by a local demolition crew clearing the land for redevelopment. And what they found inside, it wasn't nostalgic letters or photos. It was something far more disturbing. But before they could open it fully, the entire crew vanished. No record of where they went. No final communications. Just an open hole in the ground and a metal box, cracked at the corner, oozing something black. And what's inside that box might just be the answer everyone's been dying to find. Just as Detective Rachel Hayes was beginning to piece together the long-buried link between the decades-old horrors of Camp Wren Hollow and the present-day unraveling of her case, another thread suddenly pulled tight, and this time, it hit dangerously close to home. Her younger brother, Elijah, a freelance journalist known for chasing conspiracy theories that often proved more fiction than fact, called her in a panic. He'd received a package with no return address. Inside was a single VHS tape, marked simply with the word Confessions, and an old yearbook page from Camp Wren Hollow. The page had been burned around the edges, names and faces circled in red ink, including Curtis's and, to Rachel's shock, Elijah's. The twist? Elijah had never been to Camp Wren Hollow, never even left the state as a child. Yet there he was, a boy in the back row, face grinning awkwardly under a mop of dark hair that was unmistakably his. Rachel demanded he bring it to her immediately, but before she could hang up, Elijah added something that made her blood run cold. "I think I'm being followed. Someone was outside my apartment last night. They left this on my windshield." When Elijah arrived, visibly shaken, Rachel watched the VHS with him. The footage was old, grainy, almost surreal in its degradation. A group of kids, huddled around a fire, chanting something unintelligible. A man in a camp counselor uniform, face in shadow, giving directions in a tone too calm to match the chaos unfolding around him. Then the screen went black, and a single phrase appeared in white block letters. "He never forgot. Neither should you." Rachel froze. This wasn't just about Curtis or the department anymore. This was deeper, wider. Someone was trying to rewrite history, or worse, remind them of something they were never meant to forget. But what haunted Rachel the most wasn't the message. It was the timestamp on the video. July 14th, 2003. The same date marked on a confidential report she'd stumbled across in the archives, an incident file from Camp Wren Hollow marked as lost in storm damage. That incident had never been accounted for, the victims never named. Rachel's instincts screamed that the case she thought she was solving had just been flipped upside down. Now, it wasn't only about discovering who was silencing witnesses. It was about uncovering what they were so desperate to hide from the world. That old camp, the shuttered investigations, the people who vanished, it wasn't just the backdrop to a forgotten tragedy. It was the epicenter of something much bigger. And Curtis Monroe, who everyone now labeled unstable, might have been the only person trying to expose it. Yet the more Rachel pushed, the more reality seemed to bend. A DNA test she ran privately on the yearbook photo came back with a partial familial match to Elijah, which should have been impossible. Their mother, now living in a care home and suffering from dementia, offered no answers. But one night, during a brief moment of lucidity, she looked Rachel dead in the eye and whispered, "You were never supposed to find him again." If Rachel had doubted herself before, that moment crushed what little certainty she had left. Who was Curtis to her family? What did her mother mean by find him again? Was this really a case of corruption and cover-up? Or was there something far more personal, far more intimate at stake? She didn't have time to dwell on it. Because just days later, another body turned up, this time in a motel 3 towns over. A man with no ID, fingerprints burned off, but carrying one thing, a photograph of Rachel and Elijah from their childhood, folded into a tight square, with "they know" scrawled in block letters on the back. The media was starting to catch on. Viral posts and trending hashtags like #RenHoloSecrets and #MissingCampFiles were exploding on TikTok and YouTube, fueled by amateur sleuths and digital detectives speculating about the long-forgotten camp, the mystery footage, and the detectives now allegedly under fire. Every theory added more noise, cult activity, government experiments, even organized crime involvement, but none of it brought Rachel any closer to the truth. Instead, it pushed her further into a corner, with allies growing scarce and the pressure to close the case mounting by the hour. Then came the final straw. One of her closest confidants in the precinct, Detective Marla Quinn, a straight shooter, loyal to the core, was suspended without warning. Internal Affairs claimed she tampered with evidence. But Rachel knew better. Marla had just helped her access sealed court documents from 2004 linked to the camp's last surviving trustee. Hours after that, she was removed. No explanation. No appeal. Just gone. When Rachel tried to visit her at home, the place was cleared out. Furniture, photos, everything.
As if she never existed.
That's when Rachel realized they weren't just trying to hide the truth. They were erasing everyone who got too close to it. Yet despite everything, Rachel couldn't stop. Every threat, every missing file, every body, it was all part of something larger, something no one dared speak aloud. And now there was one last clue. The metal box from the demolition site had finally been pried open by forensics after being transported under tight security. What they found inside defied explanation. Multiple handwritten pages describing rituals, blood markers, and a name circled repeatedly, Hayes. Her last name, written in a child's handwriting. And just when Rachel thought she'd finally reached the bottom of this nightmare, another message arrived at her desk. No envelope. Just a note scrawled in red ink, left where only she would find it. You've always known. Now remember. Rachel never considered herself paranoid. She'd walked through crime scenes that would break most people, interrogated serial offenders with soulless eyes, and slept soundly afterward. But now, that chill she once called intuition was something else entirely. It clawed at her gut every time she turned a corner, scanned a crowd, or started her car. She'd always trusted her instincts. That trust was now starting to feel like the only lifeline she had left. She was being watched, she was certain of it. Not by the media, not by the higher-ups trying to muzzle her, but by something or someone with a deeper motive. She noticed it in the small things first. Her apartment light flickering right after she locked the door, her laptop's webcam turning on by itself for a second too long, her dog, normally mellow, barking at the same empty corner of the room night after night. She started carrying her service weapon at all times, even inside her own home. Sleep became fragmented, filled with flashes of old memories she couldn't place. A tree house in the woods. A child's scream muffled by laughter. A shadow standing over her while she pretended to sleep. Then came the moment that shattered whatever illusion of safety she still clung to. Elijah vanished. He was supposed to meet her that morning to drop off another package he'd received, this one containing what he believed to be blueprints for the original Camp Wren Hollow cabins, with strange symbols scribbled across them in red. He never showed. His phone rang twice before going straight to voicemail. His apartment was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, but every drawer was open, every file gone. His laptop had been smashed to pieces. On his bathroom mirror, written in steam, were the words, "Stop digging." Rachel stood there in silence, surrounded by the shattered remnants of his life, and for the first time, she felt helpless. Not just professionally, existentially. Whoever this was, they weren't just trying to scare her anymore. They were dismantling her world piece by piece, leaving just enough behind to haunt her. She pulled every string she could to track him down, contacts in cybercrime, facial recognition requests, pinging old cell towers, but it was like Elijah had been erased. No recent ATM activity, no credit card charges, nothing on traffic cams. It didn't make sense. Unless someone on the inside was helping bury him. That thought cracked something open inside her. All those years she'd trusted her department, believed in the brotherhood of the badge, in the chain of command. But what if that very structure was what kept the truth hidden? What if every dead lead, every missing file, every closed-door meeting wasn't a coincidence, but a coordinated effort? That night, she sat alone in her apartment, lights off, gun in her lap, surrounded by a sea of documents, photos, and scribbled timelines. The faces stared back at her. Curtis, Elijah, the victims from Wren Hollow, the burned yearbook photo, and in the center of it all, circled in red, her own face. She couldn't shake the image of that note. "You've always known. Now remember." What was she supposed to remember? Was this all something buried in her past? Had her mother been trying to protect her all along? She picked up the phone to call the care home again, to push for more answers, only to be told her mother had been discharged. To who, they couldn't say. The file had been sealed by court order. No trace of where she'd gone. Rachel's chest tightened. They weren't just watching her. They were erasing her connections, manipulating time itself like a twisted game of chess. And the more she looked at the board, the more she realized she might be the last piece standing between whatever this was and the truth they were desperate to keep buried. She opened her personal safe and pulled out something she hadn't touched in years, a necklace that once belonged to her father, a man she barely remembered. As a child, she'd always thought the pendant was just a family heirloom. But tonight, for the first time, she noticed the underside had a strange engraving, almost invisible unless you tilted it just right under the light. The same symbol etched into the blueprint Elijah had shown her. A perfect spiral, surrounded by jagged lines. Her heart pounded louder with every breath as the pieces started to realign, not into a solution, but into an even darker question. What if she hadn't stumbled onto this case by chance? What if this wasn't just about a cover-up, or even a conspiracy? What if it had always been about her?
Her blood.
Her family.
Her past.
What if the truth was something so deeply embedded in her identity that the only way to find it was to destroy everything she thought she knew? And just as she traced her finger along the spiral, her phone lit up with a blocked number. One message. No name. No sender. Just a photo. It was Elijah. Eyes open. Mouth gagged. And behind him, standing just out of focus, a figure in a Wren Hollow staff uniform. The caption read, "He'll talk. You won't." "You said." Rachel stared at the photo on her phone, her pulse thudding against her temples like a war drum. The image burned itself into her brain, Elijah bound and silenced, the shadowy figure behind him cloaked in the twisted nostalgia of a Wren Hollow staff uniform. Everything in her training screamed for her to slow down, to analyze, to think. But something else, something primal and visceral, was clawing its way up from deep inside her. A voice she hadn't heard since childhood, whispering that the past was never dead, just buried. And the ones who buried it were never strangers. She drove through the night, unsure where she was even going. Her car seemed to move on instinct alone, pulled by some magnetic force toward an answer that had always felt one step beyond reach. It wasn't until the faded green sign for Willow Creek flashed past that she realized where she was headed, her mother's old house. The one that had been abandoned since her commitment. The property had been sealed years ago after a fire gutted the upstairs hallway, but something told Rachel this was the place. Not for evidence. Not for leads. But for truth. The house was still, eerily preserved in the way only haunted spaces are. Dust clung to every surface like skin to bone, and the scent of scorched wood lingered in the air. She moved through the room slowly, flashlight casting long, slinking shadows, until she reached the back closet, the one her mother always kept locked when Rachel was a child. It had always seemed like just a place for coats and boxes, nothing more. But now, with her hands shaking, she forced the old latch open and stepped inside. Her light caught something immediately. A panel in the floor, loose, slightly tilted, beneath a pile of broken hangers and forgotten clothes. Beneath it, a metal box, weathered and rusted. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Hundreds. All of children from Wren Hollow, each one with a name, date, and a series of symbols etched on the back. Some of the names Rachel recognized from case files. Others she didn't, but something about their faces, their eyes, felt hauntingly familiar. There were journals, too. Handwritten pages from her mother's diary, and then a birth certificate. Rachel's. Only the name of her biological father had been redacted. Not blacked out, not whited over, physically cut from the document. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. All this time, she'd assumed she was on the outside of this horror looking in, that she'd stumbled into a secret too dangerous to ignore. But the real twist, the truth no one had dared tell her, was that she'd never been the outsider. She was the epicenter. Just as the weight of that realization began to settle, her phone buzzed again. Another blocked message. This time, a video. It was footage, shaky and grainy, of an underground room. Chains bolted to concrete. Symbols on the walls, matching those in her mother's journal. And in the background, a voice. Familiar.
Male. Come.
Repeating a phrase over and over. Blood opens the door. Blood remembers. The voice was Curtis. Rachel's mind reeled. Curtis had died. She was there when the body was pulled from the lake. Autopsy, funeral, closed case. But what if it wasn't his body? What if he'd faked his death? Or worse, what if someone helped him disappear? She thought back to that night by the water. The officers who arrived suspiciously fast, the blurred faces in the crowd, the way her statements were rushed and filed without question. Every assumption she'd made about who was victim and who was predator suddenly collapsed under the weight of this twist. Curtis wasn't just alive.
He was orchestrating something.
And Rachel had unknowingly been following a trail he'd laid out for her. Breadcrumbs not meant to expose the truth, but to awaken her to it. Because whatever had started at Camp Wren Hollow, whatever her mother, Elijah, and now she had been tangled in, wasn't over. It had never ended. It had just gone underground, waiting for the next generation to carry the torch. Rachel collapsed into a nearby chair, the box of photos in her lap, her mother's scrawled notes fluttering to the floor. Everything felt like it was spiraling, the truth uncoiling like a serpent around her. If Curtis was alive, if he knew everything, and if Elijah had been silenced not for what he found, but for what he knew about her, then the real mystery wasn't who was behind this. It was why she had been chosen all along. And just as she tried to steady her breath, a voice echoed from the hallway behind her. Slow.
Calm.
Familiar. Welcome home, Rachel. Rachel hadn't heard that voice in over 2 decades, but the way it sliced through the silence made her body react before her brain could even process it. She bolted from the chair, crashing against a table in the dark, the box of photos spilling across the floor in a scattered trail of broken memories. Her flashlight was gone, her phone dead, the only illumination now coming from the hallway, faint, flickering, and approaching slowly. She didn't need to see his face to know. The cadence of his words, the slight rasp in his tone. It was her father. A man she had only ever known as a blank space on a birth certificate. A ghost the world had pretended never existed. As he stepped into the light, something primal inside her twisted. He was older now, but not by much. He didn't look like a man destroyed by time or hiding in fear. He looked composed, controlled, like a man who had been watching from behind the curtain the entire time. He didn't speak at first. He simply knelt down, slowly picked up one of the photographs, and held it in the dim light. You always had your mother's curiosity, he said quietly, almost kindly. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you don't know what you're really looking for. Rachel's mind spun as he spoke, every cell screaming for her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She needed answers. He offered her one, an ultimatum. Come with him willingly and learn the truth, or leave now and never know why she was chosen, why Elijah had been silenced, why every lead she followed circled back to her own bloodline. But the catch was devastating. If she left, she'd walk away alive. But Elijah wouldn't. He was still alive, her father revealed, but barely. Kept in a location known only to him and one other. If Rachel stayed and demanded too much too soon, he'd vanish for good. It was a psychological ambush, one that ripped her open from the inside. Her training screamed not to trust, not to negotiate with someone who had orchestrated so much pain. But her heart had Elijah's face burned into it. The guilt, the fear, the not knowing if he'd already suffered too much. It was unbearable. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand her father tell her everything, but she knew that wasn't the game he was playing. No, he wanted control. And worse, he believed he already had it. She agreed, hesitantly, to go with him, but under one condition. She needed to see proof Elijah was alive. Her father agreed. He would show her, but only once they were back at the place where it all began. Wren Hollow. Not the campgrounds, the tunnels beneath it, the ones that had been sealed after the fire. The ones she'd only ever seen marked as restricted zones on old schematics. As they walked in silence toward his vehicle, parked in the overgrown path behind the house, Rachel's mind raced. She didn't trust him, but she also couldn't afford to risk Elijah's life just to feel morally right. Inside the truck, she found a small screen embedded in the dashboard. He handed her a remote and told her to press play. It was a live feed. Elijah, unshaven, pale, clearly drugged, sat in a room Rachel didn't recognize. But he was breathing.
Alive. Still there.
The weight of it hit her like a wave, nearly knocking the air from her lungs. It was proof. And a trap. She was in deeper now than she'd ever imagined, and every step forward felt like another inch closer to quicksand. As they drove, her father began to talk, not about the organization, not about the experiments or the disappearances, but about her. Her birth. Her mother's obsession. The prophecy that the offspring of the marked would one day unlock what the others couldn't. Rachel didn't want to believe it, but the way he spoke, the precision of his words, the confidence, he believed every syllable. And worst of all, he believed she was the key to it all. Then came the second blow. He told her someone she trusted had been feeding him information for months. Someone close. Someone inside her circle. He wouldn't say who. Not yet. But he promised that when the truth was fully revealed, Rachel would understand why every step she took had already been anticipated. You were never chasing the truth, he said coldly. You were walking a path built just for you. As they neared the outskirts of Wren Hollow, a thick fog blanketed the road ahead. Rachel stared at her reflection in the window, unsure who she was anymore, detective, daughter, or pawn in something so much darker than she could have ever imagined. And then, as the truck turned off the main road, she noticed a figure standing in the woods. Watching.
Still.
Familiar. It was Detective Mendez, her former partner. But he was supposed to be in D.C., testifying in a federal case. Had he ever really left? She looked at her father, but he kept driving, never acknowledging the man she saw. And in that moment, Rachel realized the only certainty left was that nothing she believed was safe anymore. Not the people. Not the places. Not even her own past. Because the deeper she went, the more it felt like someone else was writing her story. As they descended deeper into the tunnels beneath Wren Hollow, Rachel felt the air shift, heavier now, damp and thick with a metallic scent that clung to her skin like regret. The old staircase groaned under their weight, each step echoing like a warning. Her father moved with quiet certainty, like a man returning home rather than stepping into the heart of a nightmare. The deeper they went, the more Rachel's mind clawed at the growing realization. This wasn't just about her. It was never just about Elijah. It was bigger. Much, much bigger. The hallway at the bottom opened into a vast chamber she hadn't expected. It was part laboratory, part bunker, walls lined with servers, equipment humming with eerie precision, and monitors displaying live surveillance feeds of people she recognized. Not just Elijah. Not just her father. But others, investigators, survivors, even fellow officers from her precinct. Her mentor, Captain Ellis, was on one of the screens, speaking to someone out of frame. Then the camera panned slightly, revealing a familiar woman, Detective Mendez's wife. Rachel's throat tightened. They were in on it. Not bystanders. Not uninformed. Participants. Her father noticed the change in her expression. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" he said softly, like a parent congratulating a child for solving a riddle. "This isn't a conspiracy. This is a system. A network. Built long before you were born. And you, Rachel, you are the reason we've made it this far." She felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly as his words sank in. Every case she'd ever worked that seemed too strange, too inexplicable, those had been test runs. Controlled leaks. Setups to measure how far she'd go, how deeply she'd dig. And Mendez? Her partner, her trusted friend? He wasn't just involved. He was the one who brought her in. Groomed her investigative instincts. Fed her the right trails. The weight of that betrayal hit harder than anything else. Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights pulsing through the chamber. Her father's calm demeanor cracked. "Someone tripped the failsafe," he muttered, moving quickly to a nearby console. Rachel stared at the screens as they blinked and flickered, one by one cutting to black. Someone had hacked the system. A breach. Somewhere nearby, someone was working against them, and she had no idea if it was a rescue or another trap. Then a voice echoed through the chamber's intercom. Familiar. Confident. "Mendez." Rachel's hands trembled as she stepped deeper into the final corridor, a narrow passage carved out of stone, the damp walls pulsing with low vibrations, like a living thing had taken root behind them. Her flashlight flickered, catching glints of metal and blood on the walls, proof that someone had been dragged through here recently. Maybe Elijah. Maybe someone else. The air grew colder the further she went, not just in temperature, but in presence. This was it. The end of the maze. The last layer of the lie. She emerged into a chamber that didn't belong underground. Glass panels, server towers, and a cold blue glow illuminated the heart of the conspiracy, a surveillance control center monitoring not just Wren Hollow, but dozens of small towns across the country. Every missing person report, every unsolvable case, every cold lead, it was all here. Stored, organized, and cross-referenced like pieces of a game. At the center stood Mendez, his back to her, watching a live feed that showed Rachel standing exactly where she was. He turned slowly, calm as ever, and smiled. "You made it," he said, as if greeting a guest of honor. "I honestly didn't think you would." Rachel raised her weapon, but her grip was shaking. "Where is Elijah?" "He's alive," Mendez said, stepping aside to reveal a small screen. "Come with him willingly and learn the truth, or leave now and never know why she was chosen, why Elijah had been silenced, why every lead she followed circled back to her own bloodline." But the catch was devastating. If she left, she'd walk away alive. But Elijah wouldn't. He was still alive, her father revealed, but barely. Kept in a location known only to him and one other. If Rachel stayed and demanded too much too soon, he'd vanish for good. It was a psychological ambush, one that ripped her open from the inside. Her training screamed not to trust, not to negotiate with someone who had orchestrated so much pain. But her heart had Elijah's face burned into it. The guilt, the fear, the not knowing if he'd already suffered too much. It was unbearable. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand her father tell her everything, but she knew that wasn't the game he was playing. No, he wanted control. And worse, he believed he already had it. She agreed, hesitantly, to go with him, but under one condition. She needed to see proof Elijah was alive. Her father agreed. He would show her, but only once they were back at the place where it all began. Wren Hollow. Not the campgrounds, the tunnels beneath it, the ones that had been sealed after the fire. the ones she'd only ever seen marked as restricted zones on old schematics. As they walked in silence toward his vehicle, parked in the overgrown path behind the house, Rachel's mind raced. She didn't trust him, but she also couldn't afford to risk Elijah's life just to feel morally right. Inside the truck, she found a small screen embedded in the dashboard. He handed her a remote and told her to press play. It was a live feed. Elijah, unshaven, pale, clearly drugged, sat in a room Rachel didn't recognize. But he was breathing.
Alive. Still there.
The weight of it hit her like a wave, nearly knocking the air from her lungs. It was proof. And a trap. She was in deeper now than she'd ever imagined, and every step forward felt like another inch closer to quicksand. As they drove, her father began to talk, not about the organization, not about the experiments or the disappearances, but about her.
Her birth.
Her mother's obsession. The prophecy that the offspring of the marked would one day unlock what the others couldn't. Rachel didn't want to believe it, but the way he spoke, the precision of his words, the confidence, he believed every syllable. And worst of all, he believed she was the key to it all. Then came the second blow. He told her someone she trusted had been feeding him information for months. Someone close. Someone inside her circle. He wouldn't say who.
Not yet.
But he promised that when the truth was fully revealed, Rachel would understand why every step she took had already been anticipated. "You were never chasing the truth," he said coldly. "You were walking a path built just for you." As they neared the outskirts of Wren Hollow, a thick fog blanketed the road ahead. Rachel stared at her reflection in the window, unsure who she was anymore, detective, daughter, or pawn in something so much darker than she could have ever imagined. And then, as the truck turned off the main road, she noticed a figure standing in the woods. Watching.
Still.
Familiar. It was Detective Mendez, her former partner. But he was supposed to be in D.C., testifying in a federal case. Had he ever really left? She looked at her father, but he kept driving, never acknowledging the man she saw. And in that moment, Rachel realized the only certainty left was that nothing she believed was safe anymore. Not the people. Not the places. Not even her own past. Because the deeper she went, the more it felt like someone else was writing her story. As they descended deeper into the tunnels beneath Wren Hollow, Rachel felt the air shift, heavier now, damp and thick with a metallic scent that clung to her skin like regret. The old staircase groaned under their weight, each step echoing like a warning. Her father moved with quiet certainty, like a man returning home rather than stepping into the heart of a nightmare. The deeper they went, the more Rachel's mind clawed at the growing realization. This wasn't just about her. It was never just about Elijah. It was bigger. Much, much bigger. The hallway at the bottom opened into a vast chamber she hadn't expected. It was part laboratory, part bunker, walls lined with servers, equipment humming with eerie precision, and monitors displaying live surveillance feeds of people she recognized. Not just Elijah. Not just her father. But others, investigators, survivors, even fellow officers from her precinct. Her mentor, Captain Ellis, was on one of the screens, speaking to someone out of frame. Then the camera panned slightly, revealing a familiar woman, Detective Mendez's wife. Rachel's throat tightened. They were in on it. Not bystanders. Not uninformed. Participants. Her father noticed the change in her expression. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" he said softly, like a parent congratulating a child for solving a riddle. "This isn't a conspiracy. This is a system. A network. Built long before you were born. And you, Rachel, you are the reason we've made it this far." She felt dizzy, the room spinning slightly as his words sank in. Every case she'd ever worked that seemed too strange, too inexplicable, those had been test runs. Controlled leaks. Setups to measure how far she'd go, how deeply she'd dig. And Mendez? Her partner, her trusted friend? He wasn't just involved. He was the one who brought her in, groomed her investigative instincts, fed her the right trails. The weight of that betrayal hit harder than anything else. Suddenly, alarms blared, red lights pulsing through the chamber. Her father's calm demeanor cracked. "Someone tripped the failsafe," he muttered, moving quickly to a nearby console. Rachel stared at the screens as they blinked and flickered, one by one cutting to black. Someone had hacked the system. A breach. Somewhere nearby, someone was working against them, and she had no idea if it was a rescue or another trap. Then a voice echoed through the chamber's intercom. Familiar. Confident. Mendez. Rachel's hands trembled as she stepped deeper into the final corridor, a narrow passage carved out of stone, the damp walls pulsing with low vibrations, like a living thing had taken root behind them. Her flashlight flickered, catching glints of metal and blood on the walls, proof that someone had been dragged through here recently. Maybe Elijah. Maybe someone else. The air grew colder the further she went, not just in temperature, but in presence. This was it. The end of the maze. The last layer of the lie. She emerged into a chamber that didn't belong underground. Glass panels, server towers, and a cold blue glow illuminated the heart of the conspiracy, a surveillance control center monitoring not just Wren Hollow, but dozens of small towns across the country. Every missing person report, every unsolvable case, every cold lead, it was all here. Stored, organized, and cross-referenced like pieces of a game. At the center stood Mendez, his back to her, watching a live feed that showed Rachel standing exactly where she was. He turned slowly, calm as ever, and smiled. "You made it," he said, as if greeting a guest of honor. "I honestly didn't think you would." Rachel raised her weapon, but her grip was shaking. "Where is Elijah?" "He's alive," Mendez said, stepping aside to reveal a small screen. Elijah's face appeared, bruised but awake, sitting quietly in a locked room somewhere else in the facility.
For now.
But this isn't about him anymore. This is about what you're going to do with the truth. Her mind raced as Mendez approached slowly. "Do you remember that first case we worked together?" he asked. "That body in the river? No ID, no family, no one to miss him. That wasn't a case, Rachel. That was a test. And you passed." Everything she believed about her career, her success, her instincts, they weren't hers. They had been crafted, shaped, by him. By them. Rachel's chest tightened as realization crashed down. Her entire path had been a carefully laid breadcrumb trail to this exact moment. She wasn't chasing the mystery. She was the mystery. A product of it. A pawn. And now she was being asked to choose. Expose everything and destroy lives, including her own, or become part of the system that built her. But there was something Mendez didn't know. Something Rachel hadn't even fully believed until that very moment. Her mother's eyes in that video, they hadn't been filled with malice. They'd been filled with pain. And a message. In the corner of the screen, behind her mother's shoulder, was a symbol, a mark Rachel had seen before in one of Elijah's notebooks. Coordinates. She had memorized them without realizing. As Mendez monologued about the future, about secrets that keep the world stable, Rachel reached for the emergency trigger clipped to her belt. Not the weapon. The backup plan. The fail-safe her mother had once whispered about when she thought Rachel was asleep. "If it ever comes to it, you'll know what to do." "I didn't come this far to join you," she said, locking eyes with him. He tilted his head, intrigued. "Then why did you come?" "To burn it down." She slammed the trigger against the nearest panel. Alarms shrieked. Sprinklers burst. Files began auto-deleting as a deep rumble shook the floor. Mendez lunged forward, but Rachel fired once. Not to hit, but to stall him. As the room collapsed in chaos, she ran. Not just to survive, but to finish it. She followed the path from the coordinates in her head, finding the hidden chamber where Elijah was kept. The door was guarded by one final face she didn't expect, her mother. But she looked older, worn, and not just by time. "I never stopped watching you," her mother whispered, pressing the key into Rachel's hand. "This is bigger than either of us now. Save him. End it." Rachel opened the door, pulled Elijah into her arms, and together they fled as fire consumed the bones of Wren Hollow's secret. Data centers cracked under pressure, screens burst, and the tunnel behind them collapsed with a force that nearly swallowed them whole. As they emerged into the night, breathing in fresh air for the first time in what felt like years, Elijah turned to her and said, Did we stop it? Rachel looked back at the smoke rising from the earth.
We stopped this one, she said.
But there's more. You weren't supposed to find this place, Rachel. But you did. And now, we both have a choice to make. She froze. It was live. He was speaking directly to her, his voice calm but heavy with finality. I didn't want it to end like this, he continued. But you couldn't stop digging. You never learned when to stop chasing ghosts. Now you're in the middle of something you can't walk away from. Not alive, anyway. Rachel's father turned to her, his face unreadable. He's bluffing, he said. He always did like theatrics. But Rachel didn't believe him. Her heart pounded. Mendez was somewhere nearby, maybe even in the tunnels. If the system had been compromised, then the safety protocols would activate. And those weren't designed to let people out. They were designed to erase everything. Then another face appeared on a monitor. Elijah. But this time, he wasn't alone. A woman stood behind him, barely lit, holding what looked like a detonator. Her face was partially obscured, but Rachel recognized the necklace she wore, a gift she had given to her mother before she disappeared. Her mother was alive, and she was holding the trigger. Rachel, her mother said slowly, almost brokenly, you have to choose. Them or us. We don't all make it out. And in that moment, everything Rachel thought she knew shattered. Because the truth wasn't just buried beneath Wren Hollow. It was alive, it was breathing, and it had been waiting for her to finally arrive. And just when the audience thinks the nightmare is over, the final twist hits. Elijah's phone vibrates. An anonymous message. A video. A new surveillance feed. And on the screen, Rachel. In a house she's never been in. Recorded in real time, weeks had passed since the fire consumed the underground network, and the dust had barely begun to settle. Wren Hollow was still reeling, its residents caught between official silence and internet speculation, as conspiracy theories flooded Reddit threads and YouTube commentary videos dissected every detail Rachel and Elijah had unintentionally left behind. But none of them knew the full story. None of them knew the weight Rachel now carried. She sat in the small cabin her mother had once used as a safe house, tucked deep in the Appalachian backcountry, off-grid and untouched by anything digital, trying to make sense of everything. In front of her lay a series of hand-drawn maps, journal pages, and encrypted data keys salvaged from Mendez's surveillance hub. The fire had destroyed the physical servers, but fragments of the system had lived on. And Rachel knew it was only a matter of time before someone tried to rebuild it. Elijah slept in the next room, still recovering from the physical toll of captivity, his mind haunted by flashes of things he couldn't fully remember, things he wasn't sure he wanted to. Rachel watched over him like a sentry, both protector and burden-bearer, the weight of truth pressing against her chest like an invisible anchor. She had answers now, but they hadn't brought peace. If anything, they'd opened deeper questions. Her mother was gone again, vanished into the shadows after unlocking Elijah's cell, leaving only a cryptic note. You're stronger than I ever was. Don't let them shape you like they did me. And that's what it had always been about. Not the mystery, not the surveillance, not even the hidden network of missing people. They were symptoms of something far more human.
Power. Control.
The manipulation of truth by those who believed they were entitled to write history from behind closed doors. Rachel had walked away from the edge of that abyss, but it hadn't disappeared. It simply moved further underground, waiting for someone else to stumble across its cold machinery. Now, as wind whispered through the pine trees and dusk painted the sky in dying gold, Rachel did something she hadn't done in a long time. She let herself feel. Not just the fear or the trauma or the grief, but the raw, unfiltered courage of surviving something designed to break her. And in that space, she made a decision. She wasn't going to chase ghosts anymore. She wasn't going to try to burn the whole system down with fire and fury. Instead, she would expose it.
Slowly.
Precisely.
Piece by piece.
She reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a hard drive, the one she had risked everything to retrieve before the building collapsed. On it were hours of archived footage, names of victims, locations of hidden facilities, and most importantly, the the true identities of those who orchestrated the system from behind their polished reputations and fake empathy. No, she would build a case that couldn't be ignored, threading it through the right voices, the right platforms, until the truth became louder than the lies. And then, as if to remind her that nothing ever truly ends, her satellite phone buzzed. She would leak it all, but not in one grand drop that could be dismissed as noise or conspiracy. One message. No sender. Just 3 words. You're being followed.
She didn't panic this time.
She didn't run. Instead, she tucked the phone back into her pocket, grabbed her notebook, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was still, the trees unmoving, but something was there. Watching. Always watching. But now she was watching back. The hunter had become the hunted, and the story was far from over. As the screen fades to black, viewers are left with the image of Rachel silhouetted against a fading light, notebook in hand, ready to expose a world that had been hiding in plain sight. And even though the immediate mystery is resolved, the audience can't help but wonder, if they're watching her, who's watching us?